we're in a series. We did a series before the series that we're in now. My life has been just a never-ending series, right? But we did a series here a couple months ago. It was called Bless, and the whole idea of Bless was to 5 ways to love our neighbors and share the good news of Jesus with them, because that's our mission, right? The mission is to share the good news of Jesus. And so we did this, and then we follow this up with the case of faith, because, listen, when you're out there talking to your neighbors, they're going to ask you questions. And as a Christian, Peter tells us that we need to be able to answer those questions. And I don't like to use the word make a defense for what we believe, because that sounds too adversarial. And I'm not saying Peter was wrong. I'm just saying that that's the way I am. I want to be able to give an answer to those folks who ask me these questions, and they're serious about their questions. And questions are okay. God, let me tell you something. God of the Bible never shies away from questions, and we shouldn't either. We welcome people's questions. And so we decided to do this case for faith as our summer series, and we still got a few more to deal with. But I'm giving you the resources, if you haven't checked any of these out, that I've been using to develop these series of messages. Again, I just don't come up with this stuff out of the thin air, boys. I'm not that smart. There are people that are that smart. And that's why I'm reading their stuff and make sure it lines up with the Scripture when I prepare these messages. And so I've read every one of these books. Some recently, some I'm actually I listen to a lot on on audio books, and so I went through these. I've given you some of the best books that are out there. There is even more than this. And today's topic is even more challenging. The biggest challenge that we have. Well, here's the question for you. If you could ask God one question, what would it be? If you could ask God one question, what would it be? Audience participation. You got one question. What's it going to be? Yes? What's your purpose? That's a good question. Anybody else? Who killed Kennedy? Yeah. I don't think he's going to tell you the answer to that one. Anyway, somebody, yes? Why is he allowed? That's kind of cool. That's sort of where we're headed. Anybody else before we go? When you coming back? That's a good question. Unfortunately, he's not going to tell us the answer to that question. Even Jesus doesn't know. Anybody else? When am I leaving? Yeah, there we go. That's a question a lot of people want to ask. Here it is, the number one question that most people want to ask. There's been polls, research taken. This is it. And Cricket kind of alluded to it. Why is there evil and suffering in the world? This is the number one question. Friends, let me tell you something. There's 2 kinds of people out there you're going to run into. You're going to run into the average person who you're going to set down and probably had a tragedy in life, because we're all going to have tragedies. We're all going to deal with evil and suffering some sort, somewhere, somehow in our lives. So you're going to run into that person. They're going to ask that question. And then you're going to run into the person who's basically a skeptic, and they're going to say, I got you. I got you. You can't explain this one. You can't explain it. Because if there is a God, well, I'm not going to won't get there. So those are the 2 kind of people who are going to. So our goal is today is to talk about this, and I just want to say this too. Listen, this has been written about books, the whole book of Job. You see in the Bible, all kinds of other stuff. There's books and books and sermons just on this topic. So today is an overview, and I'm going to try to explain some of it the best I can. So you're going to have your thinking caps on a little bit and follow with me. And the other thing is that, again, I'm not going to cover, I can't cover everything. I thought about make this 2-part series, but I didn't want to talk about evil and suffering in our picnic when we're going to celebrate. So here we go. Scottish philosopher. Well, actually, let me go back here one second. I'm getting way ahead of myself. Next month, we're going to celebrate the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And I said it already. Every one of us will deal with either disease, addiction, the death of a loved one. I mean, we're talking about murder and war over in Afghanistan, or murder in our country. There's suicide. There's betrayal of relationships. I mean, listen, suffering and evil are real. It's actually personal. It's not some philosophical statement. It's real. Matter of fact, evil and suffering exists today 24/7, 365 since the beginning of time, and it will go on until Jesus comes back. That's just the truth. And so it is real and impersonal. This Scottish philosopher, David Hume, wrote this. Listen to this. A lot of people have used this guy's words in a lot of different ways. But he asked these questions. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent, which means, he's weak. He's a weak God. Is God able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. You guys can pronounce that. Thank you very much. Which means, basically says he's weak. He's weak. If God is able, not weak. If God is able and not willing, then he is mean. He's a mean God. If he's both able and willing, then the question is, why is there evil? If God is good, why is there evil and suffering? And it's a legitimate question. It is a legitimate question for us to be able to have an answer for. But when this guy, he wrote this a long time ago. A lot of people have used his words and have talked about them and discussed them. But this guy makes a few assumptions here, right? When you read this, he's making some assumptions, right? You see what they are? What's he assume? Well, let's go with the little bigger picture. What's he assuming? God exists. Who said that? Yeah, God exists is the first thing. What else does he say? What other assumption is he making? That's right. And then finally, what's the last assumption? No, that's the point. The last assumption is this: he makes the assumption that there's a God. He makes the assumption there is evil, and then he makes an assumption that God and evil can't what? Yeah. They can't coexist. They can't go together. God and evil cannot go together. That's what he's assuming. That's what he's saying. And so the question is, what people want to tell us is a lot of people who are skeptical will say, well, then if God, since there's a God and there's evil, then since there's evil in the world, there must not be a God. And that since there's evil and suffering, it points me away from God. But as Christians, we got to ask ourselves, could it be that suffering and evil point us to God's existence and not away from it? Could it be that because there is such evil and suffering in the world, couldn't that point us to God and not away from him? Because we understand that in the beginning, whenever you see the words in the beginning, you think of Genesis, correct? In the beginning, God created a world of beauty. He created a world of beauty because God is love. God loves joy. He loves beauty. He loved people. He loves justice. But, we get in the book of Genesis when he created all this stuff, and in Genesis 2, he says he placed man in the garden and asked him to watch over it and tend it, and it was all good. And then in Genesis 2:18, the Lord said it's not good for a man to be alone, so he makes him a helper, a wife, right? And I decided not to make any wife jokes. Because my wife's here today. So in Genesis 1, he's doing creation. In Genesis 2, he's created man and placed him in the garden. In Genesis, the later part of 2, he's created woman and a man and a woman and a helper. And then what is it? Not just so many verses later, chapter 3, all of a sudden, guess what? The serpent, who was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made, one day he asked the woman, did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? And guess what happened? They sinned. Evil comes into the garden in the form of the devil, and suffering entered the world in the form of sin. They all entered this story. And listen, you see, from that time on, all through the scriptures and all through even the present day, people are dealing with evil and suffering. It's not right. We know it's not right. People know it's not right. In our hearts, we know evil and suffering are wrong. Through the whole Bible, you read the Psalms. We sang that song, we're going to deep waters. When we were singing that song, I kept thinking the psalmist is like, Lord, I'm kind of up to here right now. in all this challenge, this evil, this suffering? When are you going to help? Read the Psalms. It's over and over. Lord, save me. When are you going to do something? When are you going to make the world right again? Why do we as people, human beings, cry out for those things? Because we cry out for justice because it wasn't the way we were made. It wasn't the way things are supposed to be. And all through the scriptures, you hear people crying out to God for justice. God, make it right. And even we hear that the earth cries out. Nature, the creation cries out for justice. And listen, the Bible doesn't avoid these hard questions. That's what we like about the Bible. It's real. It doesn't avoid the hard question of suffering and evil. Matter of fact, if you start to look through some of these other religions, some of these other philosophies, the New Age philosophy, and listen, I had to try to just boil these down to short sentences so that I could just give you an overview. So I'm not saying this is a complete picture of New Age philosophy, but if you boil everything down, they believe the divine is in everything. It's in us. It's in the trees. It's all over. And so what they say is evil and suffering doesn't exist. And New Age philosophy actually can creep into the church. A lot of times people don't want to, I've heard of some Christians, not of our church, but other Christians who don't even want to recognize anything, because if they recognize it, then they don't believe it's real, and so they won't come and visit, to a person's hospital or go to somebody's home who's suffering from cancer because they don't believe cancer is real. And so you got to be helpful. You got to be careful of this. Some of this New Age philosophy can actually come into the church. Now, Hinduism. They believe evil and suffering is a result of karma because of the good or bad things you have committed in your past life. You go over to India, they won't help the people in the lower castes, people who are living in the slums, because they believe that they're experiencing what happened, and if you help them in this life, then they might not get to the good karma in the next life. That makes a lot of sense, right? I'm still getting a little feedback over here, Craig. Atheism, they're basic. Like I said, I'm boiling this down. Because evil and suffering exists, God does not. That's what they believe. I mean, I'm boiling these down into a sentence. There's much more to these. But as Christians, we believe God exists. We believe God is omnipotent. He's all-powerful. He's omniscient. He's all-knowing. That God is wholly good and that evil exists. You'll find all these in the scriptures. Saying that God can't exist if there's evil and suffering doesn't make it true. I've said this before, and this is a tongue twister, so I have to be careful how I say this. Just because you believe something doesn't make it true. Just because you don't believe something doesn't make it wrong. See, saying God can't exist if there's evil and suffering, the atheist is making a few assumptions that they can't prove. It's unprovable. An atheist or a skeptic will argue if God is good and all-powerful, then he should eliminate all evil. There shouldn't be any. There shouldn't be any evil. Now, if you take that to a very far extreme, it changes everything. There's no evil, no suffering. It changes the world. Matter of fact, the challenge that we have is, I read in this book, the author says this: why must we assume that every case of evil is one that God could eliminate without at the same time eliminating a greater good? Now think about this for a second. We eliminated all evil and suffering. We've done things before in order to improve our society or let's take agriculture as a thing. Is my farmer in here? Is my farmer up there? Yeah, he's over there. Haven't we done things in agriculture before in order to actually improve farming, and all of a sudden we realized that we've actually done some things that made it worse? Like we've brought over certain pests to kill other pests, and what we found happened through that? The other pests are just as bad. We got a problem. So what we tried to do was eliminate something and actually then made the problem worse. So many times when what the author is trying to say is we must assume that every case of evil is one that God could eliminate without the same time eliminating some greater good. All he's saying is there's a cause and effect, folks. We know that in this world. What if in order to stop evil, God had to violate human free will? What effect would that have? What if God eliminated evil and we are left with a lesser good in the world? A lesser good. Are you okay with okay good, or you want good good? And I don't know about you, but especially as I get older, I'm more into quality than into quantity. What if? What if God eliminated evil and we were left with a lesser good in the world? No one, not even a skeptic, wants to live like robots or live in a world with a lesser good. Would you want to live like a robot? Would you want to live in a world where there's what's that? Would you want to live in a world and have a lesser good? You want to be just satisfied with something lesser? A lesser good? How about this one? Okay, God, you just eliminate some evil. Just eliminate some evil, but let us have free will and have a greater good. How would that work? That doesn't make sense either, does it? Again, I'm asking you to get your thinking cap on here for a second, because I had to have my thinking cap on when I was reading these things. As a Christian, as a follower of Christ, we believe the problem of evil suffering, actually, again, I'm going to say this again, points us to God, not away from God. And we all agree that there's evil out there. We all agree there's evil. Abusing children, the killing of innocent people on 9/11. We think of cancer and disease, all that causes suffering. There's evil, there's suffering in this world, friend. Everybody agrees on that. But here's the question. One author writes, where did we get the idea that human beings are so important, that human life has value, that human beings should be protected and loved instead of suffering and experiencing evil? Where did we get that idea? Because we have this sense in us that these things are wrong, that something's not right, that there has to be something, that there's this natural moral order to the universe. We believe that there's a way that things are supposed to be, right? We all have a definition of good, what's good. We have these convictions that I think these convictions, these desires in our heart to say, this is not the way things should be. These are things that point us to God, not away from Him. And I listened to someone, I've read this several times, and I want to read it again. When C.S. Lewis was who wrote Mere Christianity, also wrote the Narnia stuff, right, and all these other things. This man was a smart man. He was an atheist. He was a philosopher. He was a historian. He wrote this: when I was an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Of course, I could have just given up my idea of justice by saying that it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust. Not just simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. What he's saying is that, if you look at evolution, you look at some of these theories, you can't go back and say what's good and what's not good, because really it comes down, it's what I don't like. It's what displeases me. And C.S. Lewis came to be a Christian as he wrestled with this whole theory about, feeling that where did he get these ideas of what's right, what's good, what's just? What he was saying is the reality is that we all experience something that tells us something is wrong, that something's not right when we suffer, when we experience evil, when we see it. Go down to the children's hospital. I was down there one time for months when my grandson was in there. He was born 1 pound and 12 ounces. And I'd go in and out of children's on a regular basis, and I'd see all these kids little kids walking around with cancer. Friends, that's not just sad, it's wrong. I mean, nobody, who could go in there and go, this ain't right, this is not the way it's supposed to be. How can you stand over a casket of a young person who was killed? I stood over and preached the funeral of a 21-year-old beautiful woman who had her whole life ahead of her. And I had to answer the question to those folks. She had plenty of life left in her. We shouldn't be standing here right now. She should be getting ready for marriage and children and the whole thing of life. And it was wrong. And everybody there knew it was wrong. I've had several of those funerals. The reality we experience tells us that something's wrong in this world when we experience evil and suffering. The writer of Ecclesiastes said it best. He said, "Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in human hearts, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from the beginning to end." He says we were created for this heart for God, for this relationship with God. And sin came into the world, and we cannot see the whole scope of God's work from the beginning to end. And I just wanted everybody, we were designed to live in a world without sin and death. I believe we wouldn't have the beauty of the world. We wouldn't have the love of the world. We wouldn't have the peace of this world or justice or morality if God had not given them to us. Now, some people, some skeptics will come to you and say, well, I believe that was part of the evolutionary process. Now, remember this. Hear this to me. They'll say, I believe this was part of the evolutionary process, developed in our brain circuitry over hundreds of thousands of years based on what was best for society and what has helped us survive in such a harsh environment. You know, evolution simply states, and I'm just trying to put this, there's so much more to this, but I'm trying to simply just bring it down to the simple form. Evolution was the survival of the fittest. It's still in nature today, folks. Watch all the shows on Africa. So when our friends, our neighbors come up to us and say, well, I believe that morality was a process of evolution, we're going to have to tell our neighbors that, you know, if you're going to talk about that, then you have to go, if you're going to say that, then you have to go all the way back to the evolution process. You need to go all the way back to the beginning and say, listen, I thought you said there was no order and no design. Evolution teaches no order and no design. So if there's no order and no design, there's no truth. There's no actually truth for any beliefs. In the evolutionary process, there's no basis, there's no truth for anything that's right or wrong. Truth assumes there's moral order. Evolutionary process says no, there's no moral order. I mean, matter of fact, Charles Darwin wrote this, who admitted that his evolution was true. If his evolution was true, he probably couldn't actually trust it because it was the conclusion of an animal just trying to mate and survive. That's the basis of evolution, friends. Who can trust the convictions of a monkey mind, he said. It's a hopeless situation. He says we draw conclusions because we believe they're irrational and correspond to truth. But if evolution is true, then we are not rational creatures at all. All truth claims go by the wayside, including the one that evolution is the way we came up with moral categories. It can't happen. Now, people want to start blending evolution with some other process, and that's a whole different story. They'll start making all these other things, and so in order to make these sound right, well, there's evolution plus this. But listen, when you start blending all this stuff together, I'll say it again, we wouldn't have truth, we wouldn't have beauty, we wouldn't have love, we wouldn't have justice, we wouldn't have peace, we wouldn't have morality if God not had given it to us. See, the problem is many of our morals that we've developed over society directly oppose those that would have developed in the evolutionary survival mode. There's no sense of right and wrong in evolutionary theory. It's the strongest survives. We see people who hold on. We see people today who hold on to this evolutionary theory. There's no God, and look at them. Look, we see those who hold power, and they're always forcing their wills on the weak every day. Look what's happening in China and North Korea and Afghanistan. Well, I wouldn't say Afghanistan. They believe there's a God, of course. But China, Russia, but that's nothing. That's seriously nothing. I mean, that is big, but here's the one that really bothers me. See, if you believe in evolution, then there shouldn't be any problem with killing babies. Shouldn't be a problem with it. It's part of the evolutionary process, folks. It shouldn't be. All over the world, babies are killed because they're the wrong sex, or they're unwanted, or they're sickly or disabled, or people don't want a child that's being their way. And all over the world, people kill children. And according to the evolutionary theory, there is something we should accept. This is something, this is something we should accept as merely part of the inevitable process of human struggle and transformation. There shouldn't be a problem with a woman giving birth to a little child in a bathroom at a school prom and going ahead and just, throwing the baby in the trash and letting it die. It shouldn't be a problem. If you're part of the evolutionary process, it's okay. Strong survive. If we're the product of evolutionary chance, then killing babies for the emotional good of parents or whatever, it shouldn't bother us. But what's the problem? It does. Where do these things come from? Where do these convictions come from that we experience when babies are killed? We call these acts evil. We call abortion evil. We call all these things, evil. Because we believe that they're against what God believes. They're against the Scriptures. As a Christian, we have to move away from the evolutionary process about morality, because it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. You can make all the kind of excuses you want. These skeptics can make all these kind of excuses, but you can't, it's a process, evolutionary process, but then, what if there was, some moral stuff happen? What if morality did develop? It just doesn't make sense. It won't work together. And I don't even explain it the best way I've heard it explained. I've read it explained. You can read these books and read these as well. You can hear it better. The big question today is evil pointless? Another philosopher, J.L. Mackie, presents it when he says that if God exists, he would not allow pointless evil. Okay, so we've made it a different category, pointless evil. And because there is so much justifiable pointless evil in the world, the traditional God cannot exist. So the problem is how do you prove evil and suffering are in fact pointless? How do you prove that? You can't go out and investigate every act of evil and suffering, that's for sure. And it's hard to really figure out if something is pointless because it takes a lot of times a period of time for it to work its way out. Can any good come from suffering and evil? Well, you look at the Bible and we see all kinds of evidence of it, don't we? All through the Scriptures, God uses suffering to make people who they are and to refine them. Moses, Abraham, David, Job, Paul, and of course, Jesus himself. They're all examples of lives which the most awful, evil, and suffering is turned into greater good. Of course, we know in the case of Jesus Christ, his death, his suffering led to the greatest good of all, the salvation of mankind. Evidence provided by history and confirmed by human experience seems to point us in this direction, that suffering frequently leads to some measure of good. Many will attest that some of the greatest lessons they learned in life came through what? We little saying, you don't learn anything on the mountaintop. It's through the valley of the death that God speaks to us. I think it's just some local stories right around there. Buck Blodgett, everybody knows his daughter Jessie was murdered. Buck was an atheist, and on the way home, when his wife called him and said, they're working on your daughter right now to try to save her life, he prayed all the way home. I think it was from West Bend to his house, prayed and asked God to save her. An atheist didn't know what to do except for turn to God. And then through that whole process, it's amazing. It's a miracle that Buck forgave that guy. One of Buck's central messages is forgiveness. That don't come, listen, if you're an atheist, a lot of atheists, if you murder me, I'm going to hurt you back. You know, I mean, that's the whole thing of evolution. And Buck came back as this man who was changed. He became a Christian. He forgave her killer. He founded the Love-Hate Project and its missions to end violence against women and help others choose to love over hate. A friend of mine, Deidre, she's been to our church. She taught in our lesson, taught a class on suicide, on suicide prevention. You know, we had 2 suicides in our church a few years ago. And Deidre, I can't pronounce her last name, she had tried to take her life. She almost committed suicide. She was left with some really bad effects from her suicidal attempt. But she came out of that. She became a Christian. She became healed. And then she turned around and founded an organization to help people who were trying to commit suicide. She's now a mental health speaker. She's an author. She's an advocate, and all on the subject of suicide prevention. This was a lady right out over here at West Bend. Is suffering and evil pointless? We don't like it, but I don't think it's pointless. Why is it that we know that pain and suffering can actually grow us? Because we've seen the results. We see it in the Bible. We see it in people's lives. If an evolutionary process really was how our brains were concluded things about this world, we shouldn't conclude this at all. If our brains were over hundreds of thousands of years, and you know all these little electrons and all this stuff that's going and wired our brains, we shouldn't have this concept that suffering can be good, that evil doesn't have to be pointless. The assumption that there is never a good reason for evil and suffering cannot be supported philosophically, can't be supported for science, or even our life experiences. It's just not a defendable philosophical position. I mean, when we look at Joseph in the Bible, the book of Genesis, right? Everybody know the story of Joseph. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. Now, Joseph was that, snotty-nosed younger brother that was the parents' favorite and was just a regular, pain in the butt. Well, his brothers sold him into slavery. And he was enslaved, and he went to Egypt. He not only became slave, but he also then got thrown in prison. And later he became, through the interpretation of dream, God using Joseph to interpret Pharaoh's dream, he became powerful in government. And when Israel and Abraham and his brothers, their son, was in a drought and in a food shortage, they came to Egypt to seek food. And Joseph was able to take care of them and the rest of his family. And Joseph delivered one of the most famous, most important scriptures. Excuse me, I don't have this one up here. Oh, yeah, right here it is. He says he came up with one of the most important things on evil in the scripture. As for you, you meant evil against me, but for God, listen to this. God meant it for good. To bring about that many people should be kept alive as they were today. When it comes to suffering evil, the meaning or the purpose is like a microscopic organism, so small it's not visible to the naked eye, but still very real. And so many times he's saying we can't see it all, but God sees the big picture, right? That's what we said when we read Ecclesiastes. God sees the big picture. So the problem that we have, the problem that Western culture has, why does the Western culture struggle with the concept of purposeful suffering? Huh? True. That's basically it. My mom would have been 96 or 6 this last July. When I was a kid, she told me all about her childhood. We always told her she should have wrote all this stuff down because, she was born in 1924. And she grew up on a farm. They didn't have electricity right away. They had outside toilets. She told us everything, all these stories as a kid. And this was all before modern medicine where you can live longer. This was all before modern inventions so you can live easier. Yeah, how's that working out for us? I never forget, my mom told me, she says, we were never so excited on the farm to get oleo. I'm like, why is that, Mom? She goes, well, we didn't have to make butter anymore. It's easier. Later, I would say, I'd come home to visit my mom in her later years, and she'd have a stick of oleo in there once in a while. I said, Mom, this stuff's terrible. But they thought it was good when it first came out. My mom lost a couple of siblings to disease. Her dad died early of cancer. There was no treatments back in those days. I never met my grandfather. His name was Sam. My initials spell out the name Sam. You see, they would bring the deceased a lot of times home. And everybody would come over and they'd have the wake and have food. And, those people back in those days, they didn't have the modern medicine. They didn't have the modern inventions, but they had a better understanding of suffering than we have today. We don't have a good understanding of suffering. We don't, because we're spoiled. We think the purpose in life is for me to be happy and to have all these modern conveniences, which don't make life easier anyway. That's what we think. We think that the purpose of life is all about our personal happiness and suffering is pointless. So we get caught up in the material world. But you know what's interesting? When tragedy strikes, skeptics, when 9/11 came, I was over in Economoke at a church. Our church was packed for days, for Sundays, probably a couple months of Sundays. And guess what? It became unpacked. It's something they still talk about in church leadership circles, because when something tragic happens, something so bad happens, people run to God. They don't run to Darwin. They run to God. When tragedy strikes, people actually will react in two ways. They become religious. You hear people who never talk about God or Jesus, and they'll tell you, oh, prayers. I'm like, it's like saying the words prayers is something that's going to work. You see this all the time on Facebook, prayers. I'm like, I wonder how many people are really praying. Or did they really believe in the power of prayer? Or some people nowadays will go, oh, well, that's karma. That's just karma. Some good, some bad, it's karma. The problem with karma is that karma, remember, I said this, that you go back and look at Hinduism, karma, the whole thinking of karma is that it's the victim's fault. It's all about the victim. It's all about, this whole karma, people are throwing karma out there half the time. They don't even understand what karma is all about. I was driving through Starbucks the other day, and I get up to the line. I need a couple shots of espresso. I'm struggling here. I go up to the line to pay for it, and the guy says, oh, the guy in front of you paid for your drink. And my drink was like, wasn't even $4. It was 2 shots of espresso with some steamed half and half. I like my espresso quick. And, the lady's like, keep the good karma going. You want to pay for another car behind you? And I said, well, how much is there? She said, it's almost $12. I'm like, yeah, I'm breaking karma, man. I mean, that'd have been a single drink, I would have went for it. But no, I'm not paying $12 for somebody's, I'm breaking karma right there. I couldn't believe it. That lady looked stunned. I'm like, no, I'm not paying $12. No. Sorry. When God was faced with the question of evil and suffering, it started in the Garden of Eden, folks. It started there. He could have just made Adam and Eve robots. Oh. Uh-oh. They wouldn't have dropped this, but I'm not, I don't know, I'm not Italian. I don't know why I move my hands all around, but anyway. He could have just made Adam and Eve robots. He could have changed them into robots. There wouldn't have been any more problems. I mean, he did that with the angels, right? When the angels, I can't get into that anyway. He fixed the angels, but anyway, after there was the big revolt. He could have destroyed Adam and Eve. He could have just wiped them out. But if he did those things, then he would have lost the greater good of a loving relationship with people, with humanity. I can stand before you today and tell you that I may not, you may not, we may not understand all the reasons why God allows evil and suffering. But I can tell you this, it's for a greater good. I know this. I do know this. As Christians, and we, finally we are hanging up our cross now on a permanent basis. Get to hang it up, take it down, hang it up. But we know that if Jesus didn't experience the evil and suffering of the cross, we wouldn't have salvation. The cross is where we see the greatest good and the love of God. Sin entered the world into the Garden of Eden and has contaminated the world ever since, and it will until Jesus comes back again. God turned evil and suffering into our redemption, our salvation. When Jesus was crucified on the cross, that became the greatest good and the greatest love for mankind. Without that evil, without that suffering, we would not have the endurance, the bravery, the sacrifice, the courage that we see today. God in his great wisdom wants the greater good for mankind, and unfortunately there's suffering and evil go along with that. The Bible says that our God is not distant in our suffering. He's right with us. If you go out and compare that to other religions, to their gods, they're all detached from the human beings. But our God became one of us. That's what makes Christianity so different. Jesus, God became Christ in the flesh. God in the flesh, Jesus Christ. And experienced the evil and suffering of this world today. And so you say, well, Scott, where does that leave us? Where does that leave us? Where does that leave us here? Right here. To sum it all up, suffering and evil point us to God. God allows suffering and evil for the greater good, even though we don't understand it. God is with us when we suffer. And listen to this, here's the big point. We'll look back one day, and the suffering will not compare to the glory we will experience in the presence of Jesus. You say, Scott, that sounds really good. Where does that leave us? There's so much evil in the world. Job ended his, we looked at Job, the experience of Job. Job ended with acknowledging that he was the creature and that God was the creator. He was not in the position to question or condemn. Why God allows suffering to continue, why some suffer more than others, that's always going to be a mystery. I said there's just enough out there that you have to make a choice. You're either going to choose to go with God or you're not. We got a couple of cool verses in Scripture that really help. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. One day we'll see Jesus face to face. This stuff that we're going through now, that we're seeing on earth, will not compare to the glory of God. And then finally, Romans 8:28 says, we know that let's read this together. You ready? We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who called according to his purposes. Jesus said this, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you'll have many trials and sorrows, but take heart. I have overcome the world. All I can tell you today is turn to Jesus. Trust him for your salvation. Ask him to save you, forgive you, to give you peace as you live in this world of evil and suffering. We can't always make sense of it, but I'm telling you right now, what we read on the last verse. Can I go back one slide? And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for those who are called according to his purposes. If you don't love God, you don't have a chance. This world is all you got. And so I tell you today, turn to Jesus. Cry out to Christ. Ask him to save you, forgive you, to give you his peace, to walk with you through whatever suffering that you're going through. And he will do that. Good night. Come on up. You need prayer today, I want to pray with you.